Welcome into the Door Report. It is episode 117. It is October 22nd, 2021. We are powered by the fine folks at Alaco Fine Wood Floors. Will, it's Mississippi State week. The Cowbells are coming to Nashville. I don't know if they're allowed at Vanderbilt Stadium or not. I don't know if Vandy folks are gonna like those very much. But Will, also hockey is back in Nashville. Vanderbilt hockey. How about those jerseys? Pretty flame. We got to get one for the Door Report. The Black and Gold series is also this weekend at Hawkins Field. We'll have a full Mississippi State preview. We'll give you our three keys to watch in this one. And also Andy Kostka, Mississippi State's beat writer for the Clarion Ledger, will join the podcast a little bit later. But Will, another week. Vanderbilt's getting back at it. Mike Wright is going to start. We get to see some more Magic Mike on Saturday. So should be interesting. Well, this might be the most interesting game because we know it's winnable. But if certain things happen, it could get ugly. So this is an interesting matchup.
Well, you're playing the Pirate. You're playing Mike Leach. So anytime you play the Pirate, you're going to have some interesting things happen and play against that air raid offense of his. So it's always interesting playing against Mississippi State because of their obsession with Vanderbilt's baseball scholarship situation, A. No matter what sport it is, that somehow gets brought into it. And then B, you've got the interesting side with Mike Leach and his whole personality and persona there, combined with the fact that you have quarterback questions going into this game. Yes, injury issues, not just for the Commodores, but for Mississippi State as well. So you have a lot of question marks hanging over both teams going into this matchup.
Yeah, we'll see how healthy Will Rogers is. That's going to be a key. He got banged up. That might be a good thing for Vandy that Mississippi State played Alabama last week. But Will also, it's Mike Leach versus Clark Lee. Mike Leach, one of the best offensive minds in the country, versus Clark Lee, one of the best defensive minds in the country. So this should be an interesting matchup in all areas of this one. As I try to clear my throat here. But I'm good. But before we get to the preview, Will, don't forget to follow us on Twitter, to all our viewers, at Door_report, and Instagram, Door.report. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Our podcast is available on Anchor, iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And while you're at it, give our podcast 5 stars and a review on iTunes. All right, let's get to the Mississippi State preview. All right, well, before we dive into this, I know you wanted to touch on these hockey jerseys. Those things are sweet. They got the anchor on one of them. I think it's the black alternate with the anchor, if I'm not mistaken, and then they've got the white with the Vandy script on there. So, Will, this is something that I think Vanderbilt's uniforms has been something we always talk about. But man, those hockey ones are awesome.
Yeah, I don't know anything about college hockey.
I forgot they had a team.
They're playing in like the Division II CHL, Collegiate Hockey League, I believe. So you're asking the wrong guy if you want the details of how that works and everything, and conferences and detailed breakdown. But the one thing I can do is look at that jersey and say I want one. And that's all I can say right now is I want one of those jerseys. We're going to have to find a way to buy one of those to either the Vanderbilt Pro Shop, whatever it is. I got to get one.
Anything we got to do, we'll attach our Square account. Anything we got to do. Ramon Davis and some other football players want some. They've been quote tweeting that. But we'll also, the Black and Gold series is this weekend, and that's something big for Vandy baseball people. So again, we'll probably have a little recap on that after this weekend. But that is getting going this weekend. But also, we got a home football game at Vanderbilt Stadium, 4:00 Eastern time kickoff on the SEC Network. Another 4:00 kick there, SEC Network for Vanderbilt and Mississippi State. And well, initially looking at this matchup, you gotta start with the quarterbacks, and not only Mike Wright with Vandy, but Will Rogers at Mississippi State, and he got beat up against Alabama. It seemed like I watched a little bit of that game, and he was getting hit almost every play. So, Will, that's a key, and I know it was reported that he's going to play, but who knows how healthy he is. And I know the Vanderbilt D-line's a lot different than Alabama's D-line, but man, that's going to be interesting to watch if Vanderbilt can maybe get some pressure on him and affect his ability to throw the ball and maybe even run. You could see some interesting things happen in this game.
Yeah, you have Mississippi State coming off they didn't play really that badly against Alabama. That's the thing. I mean, you got to remember they were playing Alabama. They got beat by 40, but they were playing Alabama. But what they did do is they got physically beaten up because they played tough. But I mean, it's Alabama. You're playing against the most talented physically roster in the country, maybe outside of Georgia. And Will Rogers, when he went down, I thought it was a collarbone. immediately because just how
it looked.
I don't remember exactly what play it was, but the player landed on top of him as he was falling onto his side. But they said he was going to play. He had an MRI. It was negative. An AC joint sprain, I believe, was the official diagnosis they gave. But this college football stuff where they're like hiding injuries, and you saw it kind of with Ken Seals and Vanderbilt this last week. But I mean, it's kind of amazing if you would have had that situation in the NFL. You're just hiding. You have no idea who's going to come out at quarterback. It's pretty fun to follow, and kind of different coaches choose different ways to go about it. Obviously, Clark Lee just chooses the stealth and dagger, don't tell anyone, and Mike Leach seems to be a little bit more open to the press in that regard. But Mississippi State's in an interesting spot because they don't really have a backup. When I was reading on a lot of their message boards, initially the guy that battled with Will Rogers to be the starter, Jack Abraham, would have been the presumed backup, but apparently he's not on the roster. He's not with the team. So they only have one backup quarterback on this depth chart, and it's Chance Lovertich. Wow. And he is the only backup on this roster. He played for South Alabama last year. His career stats, he started out in community college in Mississippi, and then transferred. He's a 3-star transfer quarterback commit to South Alabama, played there. His career stats are 47 of 86, 55% completion percentage for 615 yards, 5 touchdowns, 2 picks. So that's his entire career stats. That's all they have at backup right now. So
I know Vandy's
they're in a weird spot.
Vandy's defense would love to see that guy. They'd love to see Lovertich, however you pronounce that name. But Will Rogers is it looks like he's gonna give it a go, and we'll see how healthy he is. Who knows? What he's able to do. I would assume they're not gonna stop.
Yeah, the overarching point there, Billy, was he's gonna give it a go because they don't really have any. They don't have Mike Wright. They don't even have a Musa. They don't have a Jeremy Musa sitting back there. They don't have really anyone. So he's gonna have to give it a go and just see how that AC joint plays.
And knowing Mike Leach, he's not going to change anything with that offense. He's gonna look at this Vanderbilt defense and say we can beat them on the edge. And that's one of the things we talked about with Andy, and he thinks they're going to attack that too. So but going to Vandy now, and Vanderbilt, of course, they're coming off a heartbreaking 21-20 loss at South Carolina. Obviously a winnable game. I think this Mississippi State game's winnable, not as winnable as South Carolina, but if the right things go Vanderbilt's way, I think they may have a chance in this one. But the Gamecocks scored with less than a minute to play, and that beat Vanderbilt, and that's something that we looked at and said, okay, if we see something different defensively from Vanderbilt against Mississippi State, if they're in that situation, there's going to be a lot of happy Vandy fans because they realize that Clark Lee made that switch and saw that mental adjustment to make it, and hopefully he makes that. But for Mississippi State, I don't see where Vanderbilt and their defense matches up really at all. I mean, it's especially just with the speed. Mississippi State has a lot of speed. They've got Wally on the outside. They don't involve their tight ends a whole lot. So one of my keys that I'll get into a little bit later is, can Vanderbilt contain those for once? Can they not allow those tight ends to gain those yards and actually have, be wide open like they've been? So, Will, I think I look at this and it's hard for me to find a situation where Vanderbilt's defense can contain that offense. But I think it's going to be more of that, hey, if this is a fourth quarter ball game, if Vandy's in it, what adjustments do they make? And that's going to be interesting to see how many adjustments does Clark Lee and Jesse Minter make. Because I think a lot of Vandy people are confident with their scheme defensively, but when it gets to that fourth quarter, how many things do they change, or are they going to just stick to their roots and stick to their guns and not change much? So that's what I'm looking for, Will.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the entire defensive game plan from the start. So Mississippi State obviously runs the Mike Leach air raid, which started, and a lot of the modern spread offenses have built off of. But the air raid is like a spread offense on steroids. I mean, they barely run the ball. Like
all they do is pass.
They're by far the lowest running yardage per game in the SEC. I don't have that stat in front of me, but all they do is throw. And so their passing plays. The weird part about playing Mississippi State is a 3-yard pass for a normal team is not a good pass. For Mississippi State, they live off of those, and that shows in Will Rogers' average depth of target this year. His average depth of target, so every time he throws the ball, how long of a pass was he targeting at that point, is only 5.72 yards per target.
Wow.
For Vanderbilt, so Ken Seals is 8.79 yards per target. Mike Wright is 11.19, obviously with a smaller sample size, but that Vanderbilt cannot die by 1,000 cuts. And that is what this air raid offense has done, spread offenses in the past have done to Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to play press coverage. You're going to have to get up and press these speedy wide receivers on the outside with the risk knowing going in that you can give up these large explosive plays to Mississippi State, but that's not what they want to do. And especially with Rodgers, with that injury, maybe not able to throw the ball at the same capacity, he's going to be looking for even more of those easy completions. So I think that Vanderbilt needs to capitalize on that and just say, if we get beat up top, I don't think a lot of Vanderbilt fans are going to have issues with being too aggressive. I think where Vanderbilt fans have issues, like what happened against South Carolina, is when you lay back and are too conservative. I don't think you'll hear Vanderbilt fans ever complaining, saying they were way too aggressive this game in some of these situations. So those words have never come out of my mouth. If they do, then I know we're headed in the right direction.
Right. And Will, you touched on Mississippi State, their offense. They come into this game first nationally in completions and attempts, and they're second in completions per game. They're fourth in passing offense and 7 in total passing yards. So, Will, this Mississippi State offense is off the charts, and they're right up there with they're right up there in statistically. Yes, they are right up there with Alabama. Look at their yardage in the SEC, and look at Will Rogers has thrown for 2,100 yards through the air. So I'm not
arguing their passing offense. I'm saying their offense is not very good.
Well, when I say offense, passing is their offense. They don't run the ball. Like they average 46 yards per game. So what I'm looking at, their offensive focus is they throw the ball. Like I'm talking to Andy, they don't run the ball. They look at their runs as those short passes. So statistically, they're through the air. They are right up there. So that's why I look at this Vanderbilt challenge and say, okay, what advantages does Vanderbilt have, and how can they attack this Mississippi State offense? But we'll move into Vanderbilt's offense. Mike Wright and his ability to run the ball. How do you see him faring? I know you have some research on Mississippi State's defense. They're not anything to write home about. They're obviously lower there in the SEC. But when you look at Mike Wright, do you think he can have the same success against South Carolina because he has a whole week of practice? Mississippi State knows what's coming. Clark Lee announced Mike Wright as a starter. I think he could have some success running the ball, but through the air, that's where he's going to have to make those same sort of plays he did against South Carolina.
Yeah, Mississippi State's run defense is actually pretty good this year. I believe that they're ranked about 4th in the conference or 5th in the conference, somewhere around there. It depends on if you're looking at just SEC versus SEC competition or overall. Where they struggle is in the passing game. And the defense is not anything to write home about, but it's not bad. I do want to say, Billy, though, their offense, their passing statistics, yes, if you look at their passing across the country, they rank very highly in just passing. But overall yards, I mean, they're they're 8th in the conference, averaging 409 yards per game. Their stats are so good passing because they have 0 running game.
Yeah.
So that's where I want to.
That's their focus of the offense. I know their offense is not, they're not up there nationally, but statistically.
But sorry, to get back to the exact point where you're going on, which was Mike Wright. Mike Wright, got a little off track. Mike Wright against this, where Mississippi State succeeds, and I'm struggling with words today really badly, but where they succeed is getting pressure, creating havoc from that defensive line there. And Mike Wright, with his legs, has an ability to kind of combat that. If you could choose a game for the remainder of this year where I would look at it and say I would trade a better running quarterback with more speed and elusiveness over one with a better arm, this would probably be that game that I would point to. Their tackle for loss rate on the year is number 1 in SEC play. With 13.14% tackle for loss rate from their defense. And number 2 in that is Alabama with just over 11% for Alabama in SEC play. So that's pretty impressive. Vanderbilt is going to have to focus on not having these negative plays because it's not that this defense is that good. They are good at creating losses and then getting you behind the chains, which then forces you to then try to do more and forces your offensive line to protect for longer. So not getting behind the chains and utilizing Mike Wright and protection schemes to kind of get him out of the pocket. Some of that stuff we saw early that we kind of really didn't see later in that game that was having success.
Yeah, I mean, Mike Wright through the air, 206 yards. That again, that's not some kind of spectacular performance. He rushed for 41 yards, but 3 of his passes accounted for the Dores' 3 longest plays from scrimmage so far this season, which is crazy to think about. I mean, they had their first 40-yard over 40-yard pass completion right off the bat to Cam Johnson. So I think those big chunk plays where Mike is able to get out of the pocket and find a receiver that maybe got loose from a DB, that's going to be key because if they could keep doing that a lot of those plays put Vanderbilt within the 30-yard line. So, and maybe who knows what happens in the red zone. Hopefully we don't see some of the same play calling, but Will, let's get into 3 keys here. And a lot of our keys are the beef of this episode. So we have a lot on these first 3 keys. But I want to see some Chris Pierce. He's my first key. And I'm not saying Chris Pierce hasn't shown us anything this season. He's had some, of course, huge catches and should have had a touchdown against Florida. But for me, Will, we saw what Will Shepherd could do. But I want to turn that to Chris Pierce. What can Chris Pierce do in this offense? And obviously, Mississippi State's going to be keen on Will Shepherd because what he did last week against an SEC defense in South Carolina. But for Chris Pierce this season, I don't think we've seen that breakout game. He played well against UConn, but again, that's the Huskies defense. I want to see Chris Pierce able to make those tough catches and be able to play the way he did against Florida, because he played well against Florida, but I don't think his skill set has been on full display quite yet. And for Vanderbilt and their offense, if they can get Shepherd going, but also find that second guy to kind of counteract what Shepherd is doing offensively, Chris Pierce is that guy, because the defensively, you got to believe Mississippi State's going to be looking at Shepherd after that game. But now, where does Vanderbilt turn to? They're going to have to find that guy to turn to. Is it Cam Johnson potentially? Is it Chris Pierce? You would like to think it's one of those 2 guys. So for Chris Pierce in this offense, he can play well. We know the kind of player he is, but for him to show it, that's another thing. And so I that's one of my keys. If Chris Pierce can have a similar performance like Will Shepherd last week, again, I think that gives this offense a chance. But if Mississippi State does a better job on Vandy's receivers, I think that may limit this Vanderbilt offense. So Chris Pierce, simply put, Chris Pierce is my first key in this one, Will.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good first key, because I think it goes to the broader thing of Vanderbilt's not just going to be able to run the ball. Even with Mike Wright, they're going to have to utilize things, getting him out of the pocket, like you mentioned, whether it's RPOs or it's just natural bootlegs, normal. He's not going to be able to just sit in that pocket and run that draw play type stuff. And he's just not, because this offensive line is just not going to be able to protect. But I'm going to actually go on the other side of the ball for my key one here, which is going to be my number 1 key by far, is don't die by 1,000 cuts from this air raid. And I want to see pressure. And I've said pressure as a key. And this time I'm actually not even talking about just the defensive line. I want to see press coverage from this secondary. I want to see press coverage. And I don't know if we will. That might not be what Clark Lee wants to do in the scheme. But this is our things to watch. It's not keys. And I want to see how far they're playing off on these Mississippi State receivers. Because if you allow them to, this Mississippi State team lives on 2, 3, 4, 5 yard passes. That's a run play to them. You can't allow them to just move down the field on 4, 5, 10, and then boom, they're in the red zone, and then boom, touchdown. That can happen very easily against this style of offense. And also send pressure. Like you said, blitz. If they beat you up top, they beat you up top. But they're either going to have an inexperienced quarterback back there that's played in basically 2-3 games at South Alabama, or they're going to have an injured Will Rogers that's not going to be wanting to take hits, and he's going to be wanting to get that ball out quickly. So make him get the ball out quickly. Make him uncomfortable, because he knows that behind him is their one backup who's inexperienced, and behind that one backup is no one. So they are not going to want to take deep shots. So pressure, get in their face. If Vanderbilt gets beat by 70 and you were too aggressive on the defensive side of the ball, that's fine with me. Where I'm going to have an issue is if Vanderbilt sits back in cover 3 and sits back in these 5-yard to 8-yard cushions off and just backpedals into their drops and allows them to hit these quick slants, quick outs the entire game. And that is by far the number 1 key, and that's what everything rides on going into. Is Vanderbilt going to be aggressive enough to stop this Mike Leach air raid offense?
They got to get Will Rogers off his spot. I love exactly what you said there, Will. If they can get him moving out of the pocket, I'm not sure if he's a guy that likes to throw on the run. He may be. But if you're able to get a quarterback out of that spot, out of that pocket, you never know what can happen. And I think well, of course you want to get pressure early, but I think with this Vanderbilt defense, the longer the quarterback has the ball, and if he is able to scramble out, that's when this defense is able to, I think, pounce on those opportunities and maybe force a punch, a fumble out, maybe have a sideline interception or, something to that extent. But Will, my second key here is contain the tight ends. And we have talked about this thing to watch ad nauseum all season. And it started against Colorado State. Now, their ETSU tight ends could have had some success. Who knows? But I point to that Colorado State game, and their tight end, Trey McBride, was the guy. He was the guy to watch, and Vanderbilt let him break loose multiple times. And you saw it against Stanford too. They had some success with their tight ends, and you saw it against South Carolina, even Georgia too, with their tight ends. So I haven't done a ton of research on Mississippi State's tight ends, but from what I'm seeing statistically here, they've got their receivers. They got 5 receivers over 200 yards, and they'll mix it up. So if Vanderbilt can, obviously they need to lock down the receivers. Those are them. That's the main key here. But I think just for Clark Lea's sake and kind of the development and growth of this program, if they're able for once to lock down those tight ends, whether that's in the red zone on one of those short rub routes, or if there's a chunk play from the tight end, I think we'll realize, okay, they still got work to do on the tight end. So obviously, the first focus is those receivers and those quick passing routes that, you got to believe Mississippi State's going to want to attack. But say Vanderbilt's too focused on that, they let the tight end loose. Mississippi State also realizes that. Every team on film has realized that Vanderbilt has had issues with the tight ends. And you got to believe, again, I don't know. Do you have the tight end stats here? What are you smiling at here?
So I didn't want to cut you off there, Billy, but technically Mississippi State doesn't have tight ends on the roster.
In that offense. Wow.
No, wow. They don't have that position. So
my whole key is taken away now.
Yeah.
That's a tough key.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is a broader point. Say a broader example would be a team that actually has tight ends. And an offense, say Vanderbilt goes against whatever team they go against next after Mississippi State. I think it's Missouri. We're basically giving keys for Missouri right now. But I guess in a broader point of view, let's change it to chunk plays, for example, defensively. If Vanderbilt is able, obviously that's been a focus all year long. These receivers, you mentioned it, Mississippi State, they like those quick passing plays. Who knows how much they've been wanting to go deep this season. If Vanderbilt can stop that, again, you talked about it earlier. But man, that my second key is just blown up right there. It will research right there. Let's change it to chunk plays.
Chunk play. That's the air raid. So I don't think Mike Leach has used a tight end. I think the last time he had one on when I was reading up before was like 2015, 2014. That's brutal. But I wanted to confirm because when you started giving your key, I was like, I didn't read yours on purpose, like we talk about not doing, because we just want to have the most natural keys that we had. But wish I would have read that one for you. But mine is going to go on the opposite side of the ball again. From you, which is going to be Mike Wright and utilizing his legs. We talked about this when we were kind of going over the Mississippi State stuff, but Mississippi State can wreak some havoc in the backfield with that defensive line, and their run defense is pretty good. So you need to utilize Mike Wright to get him out of that pocket, create some abnormal matchups out there, maybe get Mike Wright in situations where he's one-on-one on the outside with a linebacker, or he's one-on-one on the outside with a corner. Mike Wright is a tough guy to bring down. He's very athletic. He's very fast. And what I want to see now that maybe he's a little bit more comfortable, you've had the full week going into after a full game that he has played. You didn't see a ton of these rollouts and RPO type of action for Mike Wright with a legitimate option to throw the ball. It was either kind of a run read option or it was a straight up bootleg kind of rollout play action type pass or a normal pass. I would love to see options where it's a designed RPO. I don't know if that's something they've built into this offense, but you didn't see a lot of that. And it'll be interesting to see if against this Mississippi State defense that I think these would be pretty effective, which this defense is pretty aggressive. Yes. They do give up explosive plays. Those RPOs could be pretty effective, but getting that timing right, and it's something you probably haven't spent a ton of time throughout the season and throughout the preseason knowing that Ken Seals was likely going to be the starter. So you have an interesting kind of, you want to be able to do this, but we're already struggling with what we were doing before. So do we really want to completely shift our focus, considering it felt like last week we were finally kind of starting to get this passing game to click? Do we really want to try something new? Yeah. So that'll be another thing to watch is, has this offense really implemented legitimate RPO packages? Yes.
And that goes just, within Vanderbilt's offense and the way they operate with Mike right now in this offense, because who knows how much they could have put in an entire new package of plays this week. Who knows? I think some Vandy fans will be happy about that if you see Mike Wright really using his legs, because honestly, right now that's his legs are what makes this offense go right now, and him being able to get out of that pocket. So we'll see about that. But my third key is a bend but don't break defense. And we've hinted at this throughout the year. And Vanderbilt, I think, has done a, you could say, average job, on this. Now, red zone defense, of course, against a team like Georgia and maybe Florida, that doesn't necessarily apply because they're obviously way bigger than Vanderbilt. I don't think Vanderbilt is at that much of a size advantage. And Mississippi State obviously is the more talented team. But I think this is a matchup that Vanderbilt can bend but don't break. And I say that with the caveat of this offense is tough to defend against, as any air raid offense is. They've got 2,400 total yards on the season. They're averaging 407 yards per game, which, I mean, you look at those numbers and as a defense, you got to make some adjustments. Like you said, bring pressure. But in the red zone, I'm really interested to see when Mississippi State, we know they're going to make some long drives. We know it. That with the way this offense operates, they want to chew the clock and they want to have possession. They want to control possession of the game. But I think it changes. I think their offense, as every offense, changes in the red zone. And even when you get inside the 10-yard line, is Mississippi State big enough to run the ball? Now, they don't run the ball at all, really. 46 yards, I think they're averaging per game rushing. So that's something that stands out. And I think it could be a positive because Vanderbilt looks at that and they say, okay, they're not going to run the ball much at all. We can key on the receivers. But I think it also could go back to maybe Mike Leach wants to sneak in some run plays there and some running back draws. Who knows? I doubt it. But in the red zone, Mississippi State's going to, I think that they could find some success in the red zone. But for this defense, if they bend, because we know there's likely going to be some bending, but as long as they don't break and if they don't give up touchdowns and force Mississippi State to kick field goals, I think Vanderbilt's in this game. I really do, because I think Mike Wright in this offense has what it takes to compete with an air raid offense. Now, Vanderbilt, this could be a game where they're down 2 scores throughout it, and they just can't catch back up to that level. But if they can bend but don't break, Will, I think they've got a shot. So that's my third and final key.
Yeah, that's I do agree with that because regardless of what my first key was, they're going to put together some long drives. Yes. And they're going to be in red zone situations. So when they are able to do that, you have to hold them to field goals. And Vanderbilt has been held to field goals when they've been on offense, yes, and they have not held teams to field goals, which then ends you up exactly where we are. But my third key is going to be win where you can win and win where you should win. Vanderbilt is actually not a very penalized team. They actually rank 26th in the country in number of penalties per game that are called against them. Mississippi State is 119th. Now, that's not penalty yardage. I could not find those stats, but that's just penalties because I had heard people talking about that Mississippi State was a very penalized team. That needs to continue. Vanderbilt needs to win the penalty battle here, and they also need to control the ball and control the pace of play as much as possible. It's weird talking about an offense that throws the ball as much as Mike Leach and Mississippi State do, that they would be one of the higher ranking teams in time of possession. And I always say that time of possession is the most overrated stat ever because it does not actually tell you how the game is going. Like, right. Mississippi State hasn't really.
Perfect example is the Florida game. Vanderbilt owned time of possession.
Time of possession. What is really key is you controlling the pace of play and controlling the flow of the game in the way that you want to. And a lot of ways, the only stat that really reflects that is time of possession, even though it's not really accurate with these teams that run the hurry up speed offenses. So that is why I said don't allow them to be sitting on the field and tiring your defense out throughout the game by just continuously hitting these quick routes. If they want to get into if they just want to hit explosive plays, that's fine. If they want to go down the field, more power to them. That's not what they do. Get them off their game plan. That is where I have had issues with Clark Lee and the staff, is their game plans have not gotten the opponents off of their game plans. So it's not that I don't think Mississippi State is capable of making explosive plays, but that's not what they want to do week in, week out. They want to control the ball, and if you can get them off of their game plan and what they want to do and get them out of their rhythm, their defense is on the field more than they're used to because their offense isn't sitting out there for 8-minute drives and chewing up the clock. I think that will allow Vanderbilt to be in this game, and this Mississippi State team doesn't really know how to win. They're not very good. I don't know why this is being talked about any different than this South Carolina game that Vanderbilt just lost on a last-second touchdown by 1 point. Mississippi State is right down there with them in every deep analytical stat. It is Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Mississippi State, except Mississippi State's defense is just better. So why are we talking about this like everything I read is Mississippi State? They don't even need Will Rogers. Doesn't matter. I'm like, guys, did you not watch? This is what we heard about South Carolina last week.
Right.
Yes. Is Vanderbilt probably the worst team in the SEC? Yes. Are these barely above them, Missouri, Mississippi State, and South Carolina, good enough to be talked about as Vanderbilt's just an easy walk-in win? Absolutely not. These teams are barely above them in almost any category. So I don't understand how Vanderbilt's still being talked about like this, especially after that South Carolina game last week when you could clearly see that they're not that much less talented and they have improved.
Yeah.
So that is where going into this game, I have higher expectations. And hopefully I'm not putting on clown makeup this time and getting my expectations up, because it's not that I go in, this is a must win, they have to win. They don't have to do that. They have to compete. If they come out and get whipped by Mississippi State after the performance they had last week, I'm going to be very, very, very disappointed, because that will just take everything out of my mind of positivity that you gained from playing South Carolina close and being inches away from winning your first SEC game since 2019. This week would be a huge step back if you come out and lose by 4 scores to Mississippi State, who's right there with that South Carolina team.
Yeah, and on the other side, if Vanderbilt finds a way to win, that's a huge step forward. I think South Carolina was a big step forward, and we talked about that, Will. And with Vanderbilt right now, Mississippi State, like you said, they're right there. And SEC Mike, I don't know if you follow him on Twitter, he actually put Vanderbilt ahead of South Carolina. He has Vanderbilt at 13 in the SEC, South Carolina at 14. So I think people are recognizing, I still think there is that. I agree with you. I think there is that perception of Vanderbilt as literally the basement, and no one is within them and with that talent. But no, that's just not the case. And we talked about it last week. And I think what South Carolina told us, Will, is that we should set our expectations higher. I really do believe that. I'm not saying we should set our expectations for a win against Mississippi State, but I'm saying we should set our expectations for a competitive game.
Exactly. That should be the expectation.
I'm sick of Vanderbilt people going into these games. And obviously it's after a loss like that against South Carolina, it's tough to find any positivity. But you lost by 1 point within the last minute against an SEC team. And for Vanderbilt fans, the perception needs to change. And if they do that again this week against Mississippi State, I think it will. I think it's going to continue to change. But right now, I don't think it grew as much as we may think against South Carolina. So, Will, let's get into the predictions. We got our 3 keys. Mississippi State, Will, is a 20.5 point favorite in this one, according to Pick Center on ESPN. And the money line minus 1,600, I think, on Mississippi State.
That is what I was referring to, and I was saying that I don't understand these lines, because last week Vanderbilt was a 19.5 point underdog to South Carolina, which made no sense at all. And this week doesn't make sense either, considering that Tennessee, Alabama opened up at 23.5. So you're telling me that is the same level almost of differential is Tennessee without Hooker, and Vanderbilt and Mississippi State. Tennessee and Alabama without their starting quarterback, and Vanderbilt against Mississippi State with Mississippi State starting quarterback injured. That Vegas line, and then it's discussed because of the Vegas line, it's discussed as how badly is Mississippi State going to win. And I'm like, guys, this line is 2 scores too high. I mean, I would probably have put this at 13.5. In all honesty, I'm as tight as I would have put the South Carolina game, but I don't understand that whatsoever when you look at the stats and you look at who they've played and how they've performed. None of it makes sense.
I think this game could change a lot in that perception. I think if Vanderbilt battles and they lose by either a touchdown or 2, I think that's when some heads will turn in Vegas, because Mississippi State, obviously they're a small step ahead of South Carolina and Vanderbilt, but it's another opportunity, and we'll have to see. But Will, let's get to our picks as we're running out a little bit of a time. But I'm going to go. I thought about this one for a while, Will. I think you're going to see some points. I think with both of these defenses, Vanderbilt going against Mississippi State offense led by Mike Leach, I think they're going to put up points. I think they could put up upwards of 35, maybe 40, because this Vanderbilt defense, they haven't shown me much. Now, they played better against South Carolina, but this South Carolina offense is not Mississippi State. So with that in mind, I've got Mississippi State 42, Vanderbilt 27. I think Vandy puts up some points. I think they showed against South Carolina they can move the ball, and this Mississippi State defense is not anything to write home about, and we've talked about that. So I think, Will, the key is, though, if Vanderbilt lets this get out of hand, how does that change their offensive mindset? Because that'll affect my pick here. I think it could also be a game where it's 42-14, 42-20. If Vanderbilt's offense kind of, whether they stop their game plan or give in to, what's going on in the game. I think Vanderbilt could get to 30 points. I think they can compete in a shootout in this game with Mississippi State. So, Will, I've got Vandy losing 42-27. I think they put up points, but they just don't. They can't compete with that Mississippi State offense. So there's my pick. Lock it in.
Thank God that you went that side, because 42-27, I actually have Vanderbilt scoring 27 points as well.
Wow.
Because you hit on the exact way that I see the game could go. I could see Mississippi State coming out in that air raid, just relentlessly moving the ball. Vanderbilt cannot stop the quick passing game. I can see that. I think from everything that I've seen and watching how he was after the game against Alabama and during the game after he was playing through that injury, I think this injury to Will Rogers is going to play a bigger factor than people are talking about. I think they're downplaying it on purpose. And I think that is going to cause them to struggle to move the ball, because they were able to move the ball a little bit before that injury. And I think they're going to play a little bit more timid. They're not going to go for any deep shots, really, if he is playing in the game. They're certainly not going to want to do that if they have the inexperienced backup. So I have Vanderbilt 27. I think the Mississippi State offense
say your score one more time. Say your score.
Vanderbilt 27, Mississippi State 24. I'm calling my shot. I'm calling my shot here. This is the game this is the one. As negative as I've been, I think they got confidence built in Mike Wright, and they're going to allow him to do more in this game against Mississippi State. I think this team built up confidence against South Carolina, saying, "Oh shit, we can do this. We are just as good as these guys." And I think it's the perfect timing of a beat-up Mississippi State team, maybe coming off that ass-kicking to Alabama and saying, "Oh, here we got to travel to Nashville and go play Vanderbilt. It's going to be an easy win." And you're coming in with a beat-up team with an injured quarterback and no experience behind him. And I think that's just going to play a bigger factor than people are taking into account. It's on his throwing shoulder.
I like the motivation. I like the confidence, Will. Hopefully Vandy plays with that same confidence. Will's got Vandy winning 27-24. I've got Vandy losing.
Don't let me down, guys.
Hey,
don't let me down.
There's a lot riding on this one. I wonder how much. Are you going to put any money on it? I got to ask you.
It's too late now. So yeah.
Okay, too late now. But
yeah, it's already been put on it.
Okay, but on the Door Report Sportsbook, lock it in. It is locked in. It is locked in.
But legitimately not advising to bet the money line on this game, even though I did predict it. The point spread, if you can get Vanderbilt at 21.5,
hold on.
You can probably get it about like minus 150 if you can buy that point. That is a very, very big value bet. So take a look into that one if you dabble a little bit in sports gambling.
Big value point there for Will. Will's got the Commodores winning. One of us is going to be right. One of us is going to be wrong. Hopefully it's you, Will. I really, really hope and pray. So Vanderbilt coming up, Mississippi State, 4:00 Eastern time.
By the way, Billy, before you call me crazy for that, though, remember I've only missed one game all year, and it was the ETSU game. I got Colorado State right. So
you got it. You've been hot, man.
Let's go.
I'm not calling crazy. I love it. I love it, dude. I love it.
No doubt about it. I'm ready to get hurt again, baby. Let's go.
Hey, you're not putting on the clown makeup. I know that. So we're good in that regard. But Vanderbilt and Mississippi State, 4:00 SEC Network at Vanderbilt Stadium there at Dudley Field. But coming right up, Andy Kostka, Mississippi State beat writer from the Clarion Ledger, up next here on the Door Report, powered by Alaco Fine Wood Floors. Welcome back into the Door Report. I'm Billy Derrick, and I am happy to be joined by Andy Kostka. Hopefully I got that last name right. That's one of the tougher ones we've had, but he covers Mississippi State for the Clarion Ledger down there in Starkville, Mississippi, as the Bulldogs get ready for their trip up to Nashville this Saturday for a 4:00 Eastern time kickoff on the SEC Network. Andy, how you doing? Thanks for coming on.
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
I want to start here. Quarterback, obviously most important position on the field, and I want to start right there for Mississippi State. Will Rogers currently leads the SEC in passing yards with 2,162 through the air. But what is the status of his injury he sustained against Alabama? That's something a lot of people are looking at.
He should be good to play. He's been practicing this week. It's considered a pretty minor sprain in that shoulder, so he should be good to play, which is obviously a big boost for Mississippi State because we haven't seen another quarterback on this team throw passes. Will has been pretty consistent this season. Of course, that Alabama makes opposing quarterbacks look like that sometimes, and that those 3 interceptions, plus the injury he sustained during that game, might have played a role. So, he did struggle quite a bit against Alabama. That was the first time he hadn't thrown a touchdown pass in the game since he played Alabama as a freshman.
Wow.
So he was on a pretty good tear this year. A lot of 300 plus yard games.
Mm-hmm.
That happens when you're in Mike Leach's system, though, with the air raid. You're going to throw it 50 times a game. So not the, obviously it takes a lot to get up there, but it's not unreasonable to expect a pretty high number of passing yards, and you've seen it. I mean, yeah, he leads the conference in passing yards, and he's done it with his completion percentage is pretty high too. It's not like he's throwing them up there and just kind of hoping. It's a lot of taking what the defense gives them. And I think just with, and you can expect this Saturday with Vanderbilt, they're going to play a lot of zone probably. They have for the past couple of weeks, even before Mississippi State, but they'll play a lot of zone and drop 8, that kind of thing. And it'll be kind of up to Mississippi State not to force things. I think Will might have forced a couple balls against Alabama, which led to those 3 picks. But if he kind of takes the underneath routes and trusts that his playmakers can make one guy miss, it could be pretty big offensive performance.
It seems like this season there's something different with Will Rogers in this offense with Mississippi State. We saw kind of the beginning stages of this offense beginning to be formed last season. What changed, Andy, from last season to this season with this Mike Leach offense? And what do you think makes them so much more effective through the air this season? Is it just simply they have a year under their belt under the offense, or do you think there's been some playmakers in there that have helped, or what are some of those reasons you think?
I think the 2 things that you said, there's some playmakers that have been added, and then another year. I mean, we've kind of seen this at Texas Tech and Washington State with Leach as well. That offense took a big step from year 1 to year 2. I think it's a big adjustment for to kind of get used to throwing it that many times a game. Right. Just 4 wide out sets almost every single time. That's a big adjustment for an offense. And last year, you think about they had KJ Costello starting at the beginning of the season, but then Will took over. True freshman quarterback, some of the top playmakers in the team between Dylan Johnson, Jaquavius Marks, the 2 running backs, they're true freshmen. Jaden Wally, true freshman. So you had a lot of really young guys inexperienced in the SEC. Now they're sophomores, and they're practically veterans on this team, I guess we can say, because they're young, but they have a lot of starts at this point. So they know the offense a little better. They know what kind of takes to win or compete at the very least in the SEC. So I think that's a big part. You talk about some of the additions though, even just with some guys just kind of expanding their roles, the depth at receiver is better this year, which is a big thing for, a Leach offense. You need a lot of different, receiving options. Inside receivers, especially, we've seen some guys like Christian Ford, nicknamed Scooby. He's taken a bigger role lately. We'll see if guys like Ra Thomas and Rufus Harvey kind of take that next step, but they've been seeing increased snaps recently. Makai Polk was a transfer from University of California. He came in and he's been Will Rogers' favorite target so far. With just, I know he played all 80 snaps against Texas A&M. I think he had 17 targets against Alabama. Wow. He's quite a presence, on the outside there. So yeah, it's a little bit of both. I think definitely helps having another year, and plus an off season where they could actually kind of practice. Last year with COVID, it was a little bit more restricted in how much they could do before the season. So that definitely it helped having an off season too.
Some of those names you just mentioned are crazy. They've got to be the All-American, all-name team, Mississippi State right now. Some of those are wild. But Andy, I want to go to the history of this matchup. And believe it or not, this is Mississippi State's first trip to Nashville since 2009. We were talking before we started, kind of shocking thinking about that. How do you think Mike Leach and his staff are approaching this matchup because of that? Because it's a very new place. And of course, Vandy, of course, is still in the SEC, but going on the road after last week's loss to Alabama, where's the mood? And how do you think the staff is approaching this matchup with Vanderbilt?
Well, I think everyone on the team expects a big response, because they were not happy with the way, and of course you have to, it's always, that's Alabama, right? You're going to respect that Alabama does that to more teams than just Mississippi State. We've seen it year after year, those things happen. But Mississippi State was not happy with some of the self-inflicted things. Like, I know they talked a lot about, communication issues between Will Rogers and his receivers. We saw a couple of those. I think his first interception was really just a miscommunication between he and Makai Polk, which we had not seen, really this season before the Alabama game, that's a tough time to start having miscommunications. And, they really put an emphasis on that this week. That they came out, players were fired up. I know Colin Duncan, the safety, he said, yeah, it's Vanderbilt. They haven't won an SEC game since 2019. Please correct me if I'm wrong there, but I think it's 2019.
You are correct there. Yep.
They're not taking this game lightly. They expect, a strong battle from Vandy, and they're going to they want to make a statement, especially this defense after after allowing 49 points, and they allowed 4 touchdowns of longer than 29 yards, like just big plays. One of them a 75-yarder, 151 yards, 146. I mean, they let some big play touchdowns up, and I think that they're very motivated, I'd say, to kind of make a statement.
You just mentioned the Vanderbilt team a little bit. When you put in the Vandy tape, when you kind of research this Vanderbilt team, what else stands out to you about this team and year one in Clark Lee, and who do you think could potentially cause some problems, whether it's offensively or defensively, for Mississippi State on Saturday?
Yeah, well, you look at starting at the quarterback, but I think Mike Wright is going to be starting.
Yes.
Defensive coordinator Zach Arnett from Mississippi State, he said last night when we talked to him that this was Wednesday night. I don't know when you're publishing this, but Wednesday night he said, he's one of the most kind of athletic runners at quarterback Mississippi State has seen, and that's going to add. I mean, obviously Bryce Young is one heck of a quarterback. They just played him. He could escape the pocket when he needs to, but it's going to who knows, maybe the RPO, the option game from Vandy, that if they kind of use that, it could really kind of open up, force Mississippi State, especially the linebackers, to make a decision. And who knows, if that could open a seam in the secondary. So it's going to kind of be interesting to see just what that running threat from Mike Wright does to this defense. Overall, this defense has been very strong, probably the strongest point of the team. It wasn't against Alabama, as we all saw, but it has been a good defensive unit. Looking at just the Vandy defense, and at least to me, like I haven't watched extensively for Vandy, but it doesn't seem as if Vanderbilt has too much speed kind of with in that secondary, maybe that linebacker core. And I think this is an opportunity for Mississippi State. I mean, the flare route to the running back, just pitched out real quick and have a good block downfield from the wideout, and suddenly it could be a pretty decent gain. I think you're going to see a lot of those quick passing stuff, try to get Vandy to run sideline to sideline. And I think they're going to test them and say, all right, we have a lot of speed guys between Jaquavius Marks, Jaden Wally, Lydiatric Griffin. I mean, they're going to, I can guarantee you now, they're probably, I would expect at least 2 or 3 screens to him, because he's a burner and he can have a lot of yards after the catch. They're going to try to test Vandy a little bit and say, all right, can you match us speed for speed? And that, we'll see on Saturday, obviously, but I don't know if Vanderbilt can match them speed, on speed.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. That's exactly what South Carolina tried to do as well, and they had some early success. Now Vanderbilt's defense made some adjustments there, but again, this Mississippi State offense is a lot different than that South Carolina offense, and I want to dive more into that offense now. Running the ball, though, it's kind of crazy looking at their stats. They're only averaging 46 rushing yards per game, but through the air, they're top 3 in the SEC. So how do you think they've been able to do that? Because you don't see that a whole lot with a Mike Leach offense. That's not atypical. But do you think Leach will try to establish the run at all against Vanderbilt, or do you think that's kind of something that they're looking at through the air to kind of say, hey, our screen passes are our run plays in this offense?
Yeah, you're completely correct. With the screen passes are the running games. And, right. They will never try to establish the run. I'm fairly certain of that. It's actually, I take that back. They did a little bit against LSU when LSU was 3-man fronts, pretty light up there, and just dropping 8. They handed it off more than usual, and they actually saw some success. And then LSU switched to a 4-man front every once in a while and kind of stopped that running game. And Mississippi State went back to throwing all the time. Even then, I think it was only 15, 20 rushing attempts. It wasn't like oh wow, it's like 50-50. No, I think they had 10 of the 74 plays against Alabama were designed running plays. Wow. So it's going to be throwing the ball on pretty much every down, but the running backs are very involved. It's one of those offenses like, people will think like, oh, why would a running back into Mississippi State? But it's like, you're going to be incredibly involved in the passing game, the screens, the quick pitches, whatever it is.
You got to catch the ball.
Yeah, you're going to have to catch it. And Dylan Johnson and Jaquavius Marks and actually J.J. Jernigan has seen a little bit more of an increase in playing time. He's been listed as the starter on the depth chart, which is kind of funny because he only played 7 snaps as the starter on the depth chart against Alabama, while Marks and Johnson both played over 30. So, it's that's going to be interesting to see just how those 3 kind of get involved. But you'll see some 2-back sets from Mississippi State, and those are great passing sets for them. Just with, you kind of have an extra blocker in there if you need it, but you can really swing it out to the running back quickly. So yeah, I think it's a case where they're not going to try to establish the run. They don't. That's not what Leach does. And it's, you know, it's kind of, I guess it's worked over his career, right? I mean, like he's thrown it that many times a game and he's gotten results doing it. So yeah.
Andy, I want to go now to, with this matchup, it is the first time Mississippi State has come to Nashville since 2009. So that kind of sets the table for, I think you could see a decent amount of Mississippi State fans. Now, I think if this team, you know, potentially had battled with Alabama and maybe found a win or two over some of their teams so far, you may see more. But in terms of that crowd and kind of how Starkville may travel up to Nashville, what are you expecting on Saturday?
Yeah, I think Mississippi State fans always travel pretty well. You know, even like to Texas A&M, you know, there's quite a big traveling contingent there, and they obviously saw a game that they enjoyed very much. You know, upsetting them at Kyle Field. So it's 5 hours from Starkville. I mean, I'm making the drive Friday, getting a little going to a concert Friday night, so that'll be good. Enjoying Nashville a little bit. So it should be a pretty decent away crowd. You know, I don't think fans enjoyed the score line from the Alabama game, right? It was pretty lopsided, but I don't think anybody would have said like, oh, we expected to win that game. So I don't think that really has dampened spirits. You know, I think, you know, plenty of fans will make that trip. It's a pretty easy trip to make, you know, up the, you know, just north about 5 hours or so, I guess under 5 hours.
Yeah, right there in the middle of the Southeast, kind of the hotbed for the conference. And we'll see. It should be a fun matchup Saturday. We got to get your prediction, though, before we let you go. We like to bring a guest on, get their prediction. So 4:00 Eastern time, SEC Network, and set the table. Vanderbilt, Mississippi State. Who you got, Andy?
Mississippi State wins 31-17. I think I think Vanderbilt covers the spread. I'm pretty sure the spread was like 23 points or something.
I think it's 20.5, I think, right now.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's still closer than that's still further apart than what I just predicted. So it won't be I mean, we saw last year, right, when Vanderbilt, you know, came down to Starkville. It was a pretty close game. So I wouldn't expect a blowout of epic proportions here, but I do think Mississippi State won't have that much trouble. They'll be pretty pumped up to kind of make a statement after the Alabama game.
And it seems like Vandy's always catching those teams where they're mad after that victory. So, you know, Vanderbilt and Mississippi State, Saturday, 4:00 Eastern time, kickoff on the SEC Network. Andy Kostka has been our guest, Mississippi State beat writer from the Clarion Ledger. Andy, good luck with your coverage. Enjoy the concert on Friday, and have fun in Nashville. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.